when we try to improve our own government is we have to understand the tools of government. And probably the most powerful tool of government is using fear. They want to scare the people. If they scare the people enough, the government can do almost anything it wants. But you know, the understanding of the founders was that the people, the government should fear the people should never fear the government. Today, unfortunately, more so every day, the people are beginning to fear the government, and that's wrong, and we have to reverse that. But in recent history, I can think of some episodes where the people have become very fearful, and government takes advantage of it. Sometimes it's a legitimate reason. Usually they play on a legitimate fear, but then they use it as an excuse to do something that they shouldn't be doing. Take, for instance, the 9/11, one of the biggest tragedies that we've had to face, an attack on our country and a lot of people being killed and figuring out who did what and why and what we should do about it. But because there was a lot of fear and people were worried, they had a piece of legislation floating around for quite a few years. And they didn't have a name on that legislation, but it was to control the people more, to make sure that the government could come into our houses easier without search warrant, to intimidate people, to embolden the government. So after 9/11, they saw this as an opportunity that it looks like they could pass this act. So surely within a short period of time, within a week or two, that bill came to the floor of the House. It was very, very long and very complicated. And we had about an hour or so to study it, and it passed overwhelmingly. And so I knew some of the bad stuff in it, even though a lot of people, we really didn't have a chance to read it, but it had been floating around. So I was sitting next to a member of Congress, and he was getting ready and he voted for it. And I said, "Why are you voting for this? You haven't even read it. You don't know what's in it." I told him a few things. He said, "Doesn't matter." He says, "It doesn't matter." He says, "It's called the Patriot Act. How can you vote against the Patriot Act?" And I said, "Well, maybe," I said, he says, if I vote against the Patriot Act and I have to go home, how would I explain it to the people in my district? I said, "Well, that's your job. You're supposed to go home and explain it to your people why you voted for the Patriot Act, which is unpatriotic to have supported that." But they use this as an example of passing legislation that they wanted passed anyway, because there's been an encroachment on our personal liberties and our personal privacies over the many years. It's been involved with the IRS and the drug war and the various things, and privacy virtually doesn't exist, and it's getting worse constantly. But then there is, not too long after that, they built up fear because as a consequence of what was happening on 9/11, it was legitimate, and I supported going after those individuals, the Al-Qaeda, that committed this crime, and they had a pretty good opportunity very early on to get bin Laden at Tora Bora in Afghanistan, and they sort of blew it and let it go and forgot about him for about 10 years. But when they ignored going after the very person and individuals and group that caused 9/11, what they did was they diverted their attention, and they said, the real threat is Iraq. We have to go to war against Iraq. And they had to build up and scare the people into accepting this war. So they said the Al-Qaeda's in Iraq, they have weapons of mass destruction, and they participated in 9/11, and if we don't stop them, they're going to attack us with a nuclear weapon. And they beat the war drums for weeks and months, and finally, we went to war against Iraq while forgetting about the people that actually committed the crimes against us. But when we get in there, what did they have? No weapons of mass destruction, no Al-Qaeda, and there was really no threat. Now, my answer to that would have been that if you look at the analysis and you think there was a threat, you take the evidence to the Congress. If you think you have to have a war, you shouldn't do it unless the Congress declare it. And declare the war, then you go in and fight it. But the tragedy there was no threat. We shouldn't have been in there, and we're still in that area. It's time to reassess our foreign policy and talk about coming out of that region entirely.
Yeah.
recently they used the fear tactic just a few years ago in 2008, and that has to do with economics. Scare the people. Oh, you know, the world is coming to an end. You're going to have a depression that's going to last for 30 years because the financial bubble has burst and we have to bail out the country and the world. So what did they do? They started passing TARP funds, and they got the Federal Reserve to create $15 trillion worth of credit. But guess what? They bailed out the people that caused all the trouble. They bailed out the people who had been benefiting, the people who should have gone bankrupt. But they scared the Congress and the people into saying that, you know, if you don't do that, there will be a depression. There will be a depression. And in a way, they were right about there. There would have been a depression for the very people who deserved the depression. You know, the ones who were ripping us off and the ones who got bailed out. But what did they do? They scared the people and the Congress into bailing out the people who were doing the benefits. And guess what? The middle class lost. Taxes became higher, we have more inflation, jobs were lost, we went into a recession, and houses, you know, people lost their houses. But they weren't able to do that unless they scare the people. So we have to be very careful to be aware of what the governments so often have done over the years. But we need a government that will be straightforward with the people and tell the people the truth and not use these tactics to either do irrational things economically or do irrational things in the foreign policy area. That's the very least we deserve. We deserve truth from our government. It's not unusual the government fibs to us, if not lie to us, about economic statistics. They tell us, well, there is no inflation, and the inflation is there, it's only 2%, 3%, so therefore Social Security beneficiaries do not qualify for cost of living increases. Where if you use the calculations on the cost of living increases and the CPI, the way it used to be calculated, it's like 8 or 9%. But the government keeps pretending there's no inflation, and American people say, well, that can't be true. My prices are going up all the time. What if you measure the cost of your education, whether there's any inflation? Compare your education to the cost of my education a while back. Much, much higher than inflation. It was in hundreds of dollars today. I understand your tuition's in thousands of dollars per semester. But that's inflation, and it's much higher, but the government continues to deceive us. Talk about unemployment rate. We're supposed to be ecstatic. They said last week unemployment rate's down to 8.6%, under 9%, and we're supposed to get excited. But if you use the old-fashioned way of calculating how unemployment occurs, you kind of people unemployed, looking for work. If you look at people very underemployed, maybe working a couple days a week and just barely making it. And if you look at the people who have dropped out of the workforce, you know what the unemployment rate is? 22%. That's why the people feel a lot worse than the government tells us we're supposed to feel. So this is the reason you have to have honest answers with our problems, what we have to do, because if you don't admit the truth, you know, it's pretty hard to take the medicine that we have to take and the policies that we have to change. But fortunately for all of us, if we recognize our problems and we have to make some changes, I'm quite convinced that you don't have to sacrifice anything. Most people say, well, you know, we got to fix this, so everybody has to sacrifice. But if you take away the bailouts and the TARP funds and the Federal Reserve bailing out their friends, how does that be a sacrifice on you? That would be a blessing to you. You won't have to pay for it. And economy, you know, guess what? A true free market economy, you don't have an income tax. Now that's not much of a sacrifice, is it? But you say, well, how will the government pay for all this? Well, prices wouldn't be up as much. There would be more prosperity. Jobs would be more available. And people could take care of themselves. But if prices are soaring, it's much harder for you to work your way through college today than it was when I went to school. Because in comparison, I paid a total of $325 a semester for my 18 hours I was taking. And I could have 2 or 3 part-time jobs and earn my education, earn the funds for my education. But that's not available. The jobs aren't available, and then the tax system is bad, and the prices go up. Inflation is so unfair. Some people think that inflation is the solution, that it's a benefit. You borrow money, you pay it back with cheap money. But inflation is very, very damaging. And they pretend it doesn't exist, but inflation hurts some people a lot more than others. If you're on a fixed income, it hurts you a lot more. If you're on the receiving end of certain funds, on Wall Street and the bailouts, that's a benefit. But one characteristic of the destruction of a currency, as Austrian economy